the pearl of the Indian Ocean with its lush rainforests, beautiful nature, and vistas. World famous for its tea and spice production, tourism, and civil wars. Yes, we are talking about Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has been in the headlines worldwide lately for another reason. The economy is in free fall, and the country has run out of money. There are shortages of food, fuel, and medicine. The currency has crashed, and the prices of everything have skyrocketed. Many Sri Lankans blame the government and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The protests have been going on for months. The recent former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who's the president's brother, quit in May, and things have been getting increasingly violent. Government supporters stormed the main protest camps in Colombo. Anti-government supporters set fire to the homes of party officials and stormed the president's house. He had to be rescued by the army and has fled to Singapore. Corruption, COVID, terrorism, inflation, foreign predatory loans, or a combination of all of them. What caused this crisis, and what will it take for Sri Lanka to recover? Is this only the beginning of a massive ripple effect on the global economy? Today, we are going to cover it all, so make sure to watch until the end to get the full story. Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for more videos just like this. The crisis in Sri Lanka is far from a simple one-sided catastrophe. There are many potential reasons, and there are certainly many different opinions. Politics, different ethnic groups, religious-related tensions, foreign investments, the recent COVID pandemic, and of course the current worldwide inflationary crisis. To get a better understanding of the current situation, we should talk a little about Sri Lanka's history. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Sri Lanka became a plantation economy, famous for its production and export of cinnamon, rubber, and Ceylon tea, which remains a trademark national export. From the country's independence in 1948 to 1977, socialism strongly influenced the government's economic policies. Colonial plantations were dissolved, industries were nationalized, and a welfare state established with tight government controls in place. In 1977, the free market economy was introduced to the country, incorporating privatization, deregulation, and the promotion of private enterprise. Sri Lanka has a very diverse population with many different ethnic groups, religions, languages, and customs. There have been countless struggles for power for some groups and equality for others. The most recent civil war, lasting between 1983 to 2009, discrimination and violent persecution of different ethnic groups, pogroms, and use of child soldiers, suicide bombings, and innumerable human rights violations. With over 100,000 casualties, and the total economic cost of the 25-year war is estimated at US $200 billion. Things were improving vastly since the end of the last civil war, but tensions were still high to say the least. Tourism and international business and trade took off, and the future seemed bright for Sri Lanka. In the years before the COVID-19 pandemic, Sri Lanka's GDP, in terms of purchasing power parity, was the second highest in South Asian region in terms of per capita income, according to the International Monetary Fund. Until recently, Sri Lanka has been one of the fastest growing nations in the region. On Easter 2019, the terror that Sri Lankans knew all too well had returned. 21 April 2019, bombs were used to attack 3 churches and 3 hotels in Sri Lanka, in central Colombo, in the northern suburb of Colombo, Kochikati, and in Negombo, roughly 20 miles north of Colombo, and in the east of the country in Batticaloa. More than 250 people were killed. These indiscriminate attacks were devastating on many levels, including tarnishing the reputation of Sri Lanka as a tourist destination, literally overnight. This in turn took a major blow to the economy. With the rise of social unrest and the fear of the economy plummeting further, Sri Lankans elected the former Lieutenant Colonel Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Known as the Terminator to family and foes alike, for his ruthless crushing of Tamil rebels to end a decade-long civil war and was seen as someone who could restore order. In the classic authoritarian fashion, Rajapaksa began ruling the country with an iron fist and began appointing close friends and relatives to important positions throughout the government, army, and judicial system. His influence didn't stop with nepotism and corruption. He made a couple of irrational decisions without consulting experts or data that totally derailed the economy. First, he followed through on his campaign promise to impose huge tax cuts. As a result, almost immediately the government lost out on a lot of money, about 25% of its revenue. Jahan Pereira of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka mentioned the government stated that the reason that they were going to give more incentives to people, to businesses, to earn more and then develop the economy and provide employment. Many officials agreed that this was simply a populist move. Gotabaya Rajapaksa also forced Sri Lanka's farmers to go completely organic, completely banning the use and import of all chemical fertilizers and insecticides. For perspective, other wealthy developed countries barely have 15% organic farming. As a result, Sri Lanka's farmers in the country's most important economic hub at the time were hit hard and produced much less food. The situation was so dire that for the first time ever, Sri Lanka was importing rice instead of exporting it. This created an escalation in the local market and food prices skyrocketed. When the former president, Mahinda Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa's brother, started spending on lots of huge infrastructure projects, many of which were considered to be unnecessary. The Lotus Tower, for example, cost 400 million rupees, cricket stadiums, port expansions, and many other projects which did not have returns that justified the investments. Lots of corruption and siphoning of funds occurred during these massive projects. The Rajapaksas turned to foreign lending and investment to make up for the misuse of public funds, notably with China. In addition, one example to help repay the Chinese debts, Sri Lanka found itself compelled to grant a 99-year lease on the Hambantota International Deepwater Port to China Merchants Port in return for $1.1 billion. The government used that money until its recent bankruptcy to service debts to China and other lenders. The recent crisis reignited accusations Beijing used a debt trap to gain influence over the country. If these things weren't bad enough, and while Sri Lanka was dealing with all of these issues the past few years, the COVID pandemic arrived and caused further problems. What was left of the tourism industry was crushed, which was also one of Sri Lanka's main sources of foreign currency, and notably USD, which is essential for international trade. During the lockdown, Sri Lanka quickly went through its foreign reserves. As a result, hyperinflation quickly ensued, leaving the average Sri Lankan unable to afford the basics. With Sri Lanka's economy in tatters and what many thought was rock bottom, the final nail in the coffin came at the beginning of 2022 with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Even though the conflict is on the other side of the globe, the two countries are by far the largest grain producers in the world. Russia is also one of the largest petroleum production nations. As a consequence, the cost of energy and food staples has risen globally. During this time, the value Sri Lankan rupee dropped, and the foreign reserves used to buy energy and various staples from abroad had completely zeroed out. Remember that Sri Lanka also still has massive foreign debt obligations. Seemingly with no way out, on April 12th, the Sri Lankan government announced that it's no longer able to make the annual payments on the country's debts and is looking to negotiate its payments with foreign lenders. Sri Lanka appealed to the IMF for help, but to no avail. The IMF stated that they are unable to negotiate without a formal government in place. IMF Director of Communications Jerry Rice said to the media, "Like everyone else, we are, of course, deeply concerned about the ongoing crisis, its impact on the Sri Lankan people, and particularly the poor and the vulnerable groups in Sri Lanka. We do have technical counterparts still in some of the key ministries in the central bank and the Ministry of Finance, so we are able to continue discussions there. But as for the high-level discussions with the authorities that we would need to begin discussions on a program, we hope that these would be able to resume as soon as possible. India has already provided its southern neighbor over $3 billion in bridge financing this year, but is now demanding the country pay for fuel imports up front. Sri Lanka is currently looking again to China for help. Sri Lanka owes $7 billion this year to Chinese banks and other lenders, but suspended payment on April 13 while they talk with the IMF. The government also owes $25 billion, or about half its total, to private sector bond investors. Chinese Ambassador Qi Zhenhong said on April 25th that negotiating with the IMF would interfere with Beijing's loan offer. The IMF usually requires a borrower to work out a detail with all creditors to reduce debts. The current president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who took over the country after Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his family fled the country, is continuing talks with the IMF. As of the date of this video, no arrangement has been made. Day after day, as average Sri Lankans are running out of the basics like food and fuel, amongst other things, tensions and herd politics are rising once again. People are hoarding and fighting over basic staples, which is only making things like hyperinflation worse. With poverty and social tension setting into place, many experts fear that this may trigger further chaos or worse, another bloody civil war. Will Sri Lanka remain the only country to suffer this sad state of affairs, or is this only the beginning of a domino effect of other fragile economies across the world? That brings us to the end of the video. Please put your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for further videos just like this. I'll see you